This is probably the last drawing done by Vincent van Gogh during his stay in the Belgian coal mining region, the Borinage. The Diggers, an original now in the possession of the Museum of the Fine Arts in Mons. Here in this house, in the room behind this window, he decides to make a life for himself as a professional artist. Vincent van Gogh. To find out more about Vincent van Gogh, we have to go to the country of his birth, the Netherlands, a small European country on the North Sea. It lies so low that part of it is situated 6 meters below sea level, an exciting thought for anyone who visits it. The Netherlands has always had to struggle against the water. If you want to live and work and build in those lowlands, you'll have to come up with ways of coping, for example by stemming the waters by means of dikes and dams. Once the Netherlands was a prominent seafaring nation. It's a democratic constitutional monarchy, run from these government buildings in The Hague. This is also where the Peace Palace stands, the seat of the International Court of Justice. Human effort can conquer water, but sometimes it happens on its own, and with dazzling consequences. And then there's the wind that has been turning the famous windmills for centuries. In that low and flat country, Vincent Willem van Gogh first sees the light of day, in the small village of Zundert in the south of the Netherlands. That happens on March the 30th, 1853. As the eldest son of the Reverend Theodorus van Gogh and Anna Cornelia Corbentus. 1 year to the day after the birth of their first stillborn son, who, had he remained alive, would also have been called Vincent Willem. 3 daughters are born to the Van Gogh family, 2 of whom you see here, and 2 other sons, one of whom is Theo, with whom Vincent would have an exceptionally tight bond throughout his life. The house of his birth hasn't survived, but a memorial tablet on the house that stands there now serves as a reminder that this is where he was born. On this square in Zundert stands a statue made by the Russian-French sculptor Zadkine, symbolizing the great solidarity that existed between Vincent and his brother Theo. On the pedestal, an excerpt from the very last letter that Vincent wrote to his brother. After leaving school and a period of about 6 years during which Vincent works in the art trade, mysticism and religion get a hold on him. But he gets rejected for a degree course in theology and ends up here, in the impoverished and dreary mining district of the Borinage, in the Wallonian, French-speaking part of Belgium. There in 1880, amongst the overgrown mountains of cinders and coal dust, his career as a painter would begin in earnest. In this house, Vincent moves into this room, when sent here as a lay preacher, anything but luxurious accommodations, yet he finds it out of proportion to the living conditions of the miners and decides to leave and live as a miner among the miners. Their lives are well-nigh inhuman. Nobody is aware of the dangers, of mining gas, for example. The miners' lamps with open flames cause terrible explosions that cost many people's lives. There are no unions. Rescue workers lack the means to rescue. Tools are primitive and hardly serve their purpose. Infectious diseases, black lungs, no one has a clue. There are too few workers. They are criminally underpaid. A pittance, they call it. And there are even negotiations about wage reductions. Vincent deliberately lives under the same abominable conditions as the miners and tries to offer consolation, professing practical Christianity. He sees all that misery and doesn't know how to describe it. He wants to show the outside world what's going on here. And he would, not much later. First by drawing, and then by painting. The pitmen live their lives underground. In the darkness of early morning, they descend down the shaft to the pitch darkness below and come back up in the darkness of night, exhausted, too tired to stay awake. The tower of the elevator shaft is constantly being watched with feelings of fear and anxiety. If the wheel stops turning, something has gone wrong. In this drawing, without perspective, it all looks pretty spacious, but in reality, it looks very different. Deep under the ground, the miners seek out the layers of coal and do their work as best they can, for better or worse. Black with dust, they slave away through the day for 14 hours, with a few minutes of rest to eat and drink some dry bread and water in an uncomfortable position. Hacking at coal with primitive hammers they made themselves in the paltry light of a small oil lamp. When they come home at night, they're too tired to wash up. The coal mines have been shut down. At a museum, the grim reality has been preserved and reconstructed, with the customary statue of the Virgin Mary at the entrance. Down in the mine galleries, horses are used to pull the coal cars, sometimes no less than 300. All those horses only get to see daylight once in their dark lives. When, decrepit and worn out, they're brought to the slaughterhouse. Vincent van Gogh starts drawing and records what he sees. Vincent's last dwelling in the Borinage in Quem is now the Maison Van Gogh, a museum about the period he spent in the mining district, enriched with many of his later works. A memorial tablet shows a fragment from one of the letters he wrote to his brother Theo. On September the 24th, 1880, he wrote, "I shall set to work again with my pencil, which I'd cast aside in my deep dejection, and I shall draw again." Theo subsequently managed to persuade his brother not to devote himself to religion anymore, but wholeheartedly to painting. And Vincent took his advice. Here are all the letters that Theo received from Vincent. Theo helped to give guidance to the life of his older brother, and he would support Vincent throughout his life, also and above all financially. Vincent was sacked as an evangelist, purportedly because he had an insufficient command of the French language. A feeble pretext to mask the truth. They considered him unsuitable as an evangelist. He's a Protestant among Catholics. Could that have played a role? The coal mining period of the 19th century is considered a black page in the local history. What happened here lives on in memory as a warning. This endless row of mine workers' houses was restored and declared together with the mines as industrial heritage. Some of the houses can be visited and have been equipped with the authentic furnishings of the era. "1881. Vincent van Gogh returns to the Netherlands where he'll be working for several years in various places, among others in his native Zundert, as well as in the nearby village of Etten. He draws and paints still lives, peasants and landscapes, though he declares himself not to be a landscape painter. For the most part, he searches out and paints human figures. Vincent has a serious quarrel with his parents and leaves for The Hague, where he portrays everyday life. This is how linen was laid on sand to dry back then. The Hague at this point is the center of Dutch painting, and whether by accident or not, he finds lodgings in the so-called painters' district, the Schilderswijk. The Hague, city of art markets and countless museums. He receives lessons from the famous painter Anton Mauve, an uncle of his by marriage. Just like back then, there are still many galleries and art dealers today. Vincent is very much inspired in The Hague by the architecture of all kinds of buildings. But again and again, it's people he paints, like in this case, poor people hoping for a prize in the state lottery. Exceptional buildings draw his attention, such as here, the monumental train station Hollandspoor. This is what it looks like now, restored and surrounded by modern housing developments of the 21st century. In 1882, Van Gogh drew it more or less as seen from this spot. Vincent draws and paints like a madman. He tries every possible technique and learns a lot from Anton Mauve. And again, Vincent portrays dejected human figures, toiling and plodding and ploughing the field with bent back. But also peaceful subjects, subtle, expressive, often dark, even gloomy. In the fall of 1883, a dispute, this time with Anton Mauve, and a broken relationship drive Vincent to the northern province Drenthe. In a letter to Theo, he writes about the village of Zwelo. The houses here are broad-fronted, set among oak trees of a superb bronze. Tones of gold-green in the moss, of reddish or bluish or yellowish dark lilac greys in the earth. Tones of black in the wet trunks, standing out against a golden rain of swirling, teeming autumn leaves. And the church of Zwelo has become famous through Van Gogh's depiction of it. Vincent had heard about the poverty in Drenthe and the grueling life in the peat district. He wanted to see it, to draw and paint it. His destination is New Amsterdam, where he rents a room in a boarding house. From this room, he sees the drawbridge. Not this one, of course, but this one. He also paints the peat cutters, the heath cottages, and the boats used to transport the peat. After those few solitary months in Drenthe, Vincent decides to go back to his parental home. His parents have in the meantime moved to the village of Nuenen, where his father has been appointed as a clergyman. Nuenen, the place where he would make his most famous painting. Vincent will later be immortalized there in bronze as that strange man who always walked through the village with his drawing portfolio and wanted to make a portrait of everyone. His parents live in this parsonage, which is still there and which has also, of course, been painted by Vincent. Vincent makes up with his parents, and his mother gives him the use of this scullery, a laundry or mangling room really, but which he can use as a studio. The mangling room is still there. From here he looked out on the garden of the parsonage. A little further away stood the squat square tower that appears in a lot of his work. In Nuenen he produces an enormous amount of drawings and paintings. For the most part he paints people at work. Weavers, reapers, sowers. On March the 26th, 1885, his father suddenly dies at the age of 63. This is where he was buried, in the old cemetery where that old truncated tower used to stand. A small part of the cemetery has been preserved. The Dutch Reformed church in Nuenen still stands there, just like Van Gogh painted it in 1884. And this is an actual picture of the man Vincent painted as one of the figures in The Potato Eaters. It's the second from the right. He would never know that it would be his most successful painting. In November 1885, Vincent leaves rather suddenly for the Belgian seaport Antwerp, where he'd stay for 3 months. He'd had enough of the solitary countryside. In the city he can paint models. In Nuenen, he had too little opportunity to do so. Theo continues to send him money. From Antwerp, Vincent makes the leap to a really major city, Paris, the city of lights. One of the most beautiful cities in the world, and already for more than 1,000 years the capital of France. City of the Arc de Triomphe, the Seine, Montmartre and the Sacré-Cœur, city of the Notre Dame and the Latin Quarter. City of boulevards and arcades and bridges across the river. And city of the museums, of the Louvre, the Bastille and the Marais. Of the Place Vendôme and the Eiffel Tower, which in Van Gogh's day was only just being built. From one day to the next, Vincent finds himself in a bustling city and is introduced to a completely different way of life. He also falls under the spell of the Japanese visual arts. His brother Theo, the art dealer, had insisted that Vincent come to Paris. And despite the latter's restless character and unpredictable behavior, Theo takes Vincent in. He introduces him to many of his great examples: Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Paul Gauguin, Camille Pissarro, Émile Bernard, and many others. Vincent becomes acquainted with Impressionism and Pointillism, the technique of using colored dots. In Paris, but also later in the south of France, he finds the inspiration to leave his gloomy and dark style of painting behind, and to let the light and orange and yellow of the sun, the sunflowers and wheat predominate. In February 1888, Vincent van Gogh takes the slow train from Paris to Arles, in the south of France, in search of the light, color and warmth of the Provence. The journey is a feast for his eyes. He sees picturesque villages and cities and towns and colorful landscapes, which we nowadays, on our way by car to the sunny south, carelessly race past. Upon his arrival in Arles, he reports to Theo by letter. "I've seen a magnificent landscape, immense yellow rocks, strangely intricate with the most imposing shapes. Rows of small round trees with olive green or grey-green foliage, which could well be lemon trees. Vincent continues, but here in Arles, the country appears flat. I saw some magnificent red terrain planted with grapevines and a background of mountains of the most delicate lilac. Those few lines again testify to the passion for colour that brought him so much posthumous fame. The purple of the lavender, and especially the yellow of the celebrated sunflowers, the tournesols, that always turn to the sun with such touching loyalty. The skyline of Arles today, and as Vincent painted it. Arles, in the département Bouches-du-Rhône, formerly Arelate, Rome of the Gauls, traversed by the Grand Rhône, which forms its own delta here before draining into the Mediterranean Sea. Arles, city of the scorching heat, but also of the Mistral, the stiff north wind which can lash at a painter and his easel below a clear blue sky. Arles, even now, still the city of Vincent van Gogh, who calls down an unequaled explosion of colour on himself while he's here. The memory of Van Gogh has been kept alive, and Arles still is a centre for artists. Vincent only stays in Arles for 15 months, but goes through an exceptionally productive period. He sometimes makes 3 paintings a day and calls himself a painting machine, spurred on by the remarkable effects of light and by the colours he sees everywhere, interpreting them in his own way. The streets of Arles are often narrow and tortuous, so as to break the fury of the Mistral as much as possible. Vincent is not very popular in Arles. The locals see him as a bit strange and don't quite know what to make of his odd behaviour. But he does strike up a friendship with a mailman, Joseph Moulin, who draws his attention to a small house that he might rent for little money. The yellow house with the green shutters. Vincent lived in the right-hand side. This picture was taken much later, of course, and in the Second World War, the yellow house was destroyed by German bombs. Here at the Place Lamartine in Arles, there's only a cafe bearing the name of Vincent van Gogh. Everywhere else in Arles, there are still reproductions of Van Gogh's works in places where the subjects were painted. Vincent paints a lot and fast. He sets out before daybreak to work outdoors. To Theo he writes, "Early tomorrow I'll set out for Les Saintes Maries de la Mer on the Mediterranean by coach. It's 50 kilometers from here." You cross the Camargue, grass plains where there are herds of little white horses, half wild and very beautiful. Everything Vincent sees he wants to render in paint and show to others. That goes, as of old, for workers in the fields, for the typical architecture of the region, and for the characteristic trailers of the gypsies that move around in that swampy territory. Once a year they travel as a kind of pilgrimage to Les Saintes Maries de la Mer. and the flamingos, stirring up their underwater food with their feet. Vincent remains in Les Saintes-Maries for a week and reports to Theo, "I brought 3 canvases and have covered them with 2 marines and a view of the village." The beach here is sandy like in Holland, he goes on, without the dunes, but so much bluer. Today, Les Saintes-Maries de la Mer is a popular bathing resort because of that beach, unlike the days of old when the fishing boats went out to sea each day. Back in Arles, Vincent paints and draws at high speed, as if he had but little time left. Like this series of subjects in the city park. At the Place du Forum, you can still find the Night Café, made famous by Van Gogh. When in October 1888 the French painter Paul Gauguin came to live and work with Vincent, he also painted that same Night Café. And here the well-known drawbridge at Langlois, as it is still today, the destination of many a devotee from every part of the globe. Van Gogh painted at least 4 versions of the bridge. Vincent usually goes about on foot along the unpaved roads of the time, in the burning sun with his easel on his back, on the lookout for interesting subjects, such as the ruins of the Abbey of Montmajour, which commands the landscape around Arles. In Fontfier, near the Abbey of Montmajour, he paints the mill of Alphonse Daudet, author of the book Letters from My Mill, Lettres de mon Moulin. He visits Les Baux de Provence. Now a dead little village, very popular among culinary tourists, it once gave its name to bauxite, which used to be mined here. Along country roads that make heavy going, he climbs the hills around Arles and looks out across the Provençal countryside. This is the plain of La Croix. His physical and mental health leave much to be desired and get increasingly worse. The detrimental effects of the scorching sun and the tensions between Vincent and his friend Paul Gauguin who is staying with him at the Yellow House, increase. Yet he keeps on painting, despite his irregular pattern of life and neglect of his body. This is the hospital in Arles, where Vincent is admitted just before Christmas 1888 after a hefty row with his friend and housemate Paul Gauguin. The reason behind the row has never been clarified. Neither has it become really clear who cut off a piece of Vincent's ear. They say it was Vincent himself, but there also exists a version which indicates it was Gauguin. Vincent stays at the hospital for about 2 weeks, also because he's very unstable mentally. His brother Theo comes to Arles immediately to take stock of the situation. Paul Gauguin leaves Arles shortly after the incident. Vincent and Gauguin would later keep in touch by correspondence, but never meet in person again. Gauguin let Theo know that he and Vincent couldn't possibly live side by side without problems because of the incompatibility of their characters. Vincent painted the inner courtyard of the hospital, which has hardly changed. He also painted one of the wards for the doctor attending him, but the doctor refused the gift as he didn't like it at all. After a few months, the General Hospital in Arles can do no more for Vincent. He decides to have himself voluntarily confined at the psychiatric clinic in Saint-Remy de Provence. At Saint-Remy as well, care has been taken to change the appearance of the place as little as possible. In the Centre d'Art, everything revolves around Van Gogh. Thousands of tourists from France and abroad come to visit Saint-Remy and its surroundings. Saint-Remy is also the birthplace of Nostradamus, the astrologer, physician and prophet from the 16th century. The Centre d'Art is a museum and visitors center. There are many reproductions of Van Gogh's works on display here. Here in this psychiatric clinic, an old monastery, Vincent undergoes treatment. He suffers from serious depressions and hallucinations. A clinic like this used to be called an insane asylum. Something that shouldn't be seen and had to be kept hidden as much as possible. Which is why the clinic was, and still is, completely walled in. At the time, the patients are more or less regarded as prisoners. They are considered dangerous. The windows are equipped with sturdy bars. There in the distance is the entrance, almost hidden behind the trees. The therapy is tough and simple, cold water baths to calm the patients down. Vincent indeed seems to benefit from them. Over the course of time, with many ups and downs, he slowly but surely improves and recovers his old self again. At first, he only paints inside. And even paints a portrait of the chief orderly. He also portrays how fellow patients are aired in the inner courtyard, not a very uplifting sight. Vincent is occasionally given some more liberties. Because his mental condition is considered much less serious than that of the other patients, he's given more freedom of movement and can resume working outdoors again. This view of the institution's garden he interpreted in this famous work, The Olive Trees. After a year at the Clinic of Saint-Rémy, he's still more or less unstable. Yet he decides, with the consent of the doctor attending him, to go back north again. He's advised to go to Auvers-sur-Oise, where he can receive help from the art connoisseur and physician, Dr. Gachet. And so after more than 2 years, he embarks on another long journey by train to Auvers-sur-Oise, some 30 kilometers north of Paris. The northern French landscape. Restful panoramas across colorful, hilly wheat fields. The sun beams down among the fast-moving clouds, driven on by the stiff wind. Humans and animals do what they've always done, providing for food. There in Auvers-sur-Oise, a real artist's village, Vincent van Gogh will spend the last months of his life. The Oise River, which gave the French département its name, a slowly meandering current that runs into the Seine. These old depictions show that almost nothing has changed in Auvers and its surroundings. Vincent arrives by train on May the 20th, 1890. Here he can continue to recover and paint to his heart's content. He'd be making 1 painting a day here. He finds accommodation in the ancient historical Auberge Ravoux. A passionate entrepreneur has restored the inn to its original state. The table at which Vincent had his daily meals looks inviting, as if he's being expected later on. Even his cherished glass of absinthe is waiting for him. Vincent stays in a bare attic room on the 3rd floor, paying 3.5 francs a day. Cheap, but also primitive. He has to make do with a bed, a closet, and a chair. Every day, at least 2 times, he clatters up and down the stairs, with his easel on his back. Auvers-sur-Oise, and the Auberge Ravoux as well, of course, become places of pilgrimage. This book attests to that. Film director Roman Polanski was touched emotionally here, as were countless other people. An important, perhaps the most important reason for Vincent to come to Auvers is the presence of Dr. Paul Ferdinand Gachet, an amateur painter and benefactor of many famous painters of the period. Moreover, Gachet is a physician. He recognizes Vincent's syndrome like no one else and is able to give him support in every respect, as an art connoisseur and as a physician. To his sister Will, Vincent writes, "I have found a true friend in Dr. Gachet, something like another brother, so much do we resemble each other physically and also mentally. He's a very nervous man himself and very queer in his behavior. He has extended much friendliness to the artists of the new school and has helped them as much as was in his power. Dr. Gachet's house lies up there and much has been preserved. Like this red-coloured table at which Gachet was seated when Vincent immortalized him. Behind the house are caverns and caves, secret hiding places for many famous works of art. The paintings were hidden here from enemies in both world wars, who would have stolen them if they had known. Inside, everything reminds one of the days of old, when Dr. Gachet would dine here together with Vincent. In the course of his career, Dr. Gachet had gained a lot of experience with both the physically and mentally ill. In that sense, he was of great support to Vincent. Many a time, Vincent entered Gachet's house by means of this hallway and these stairs. Most important to both of them was their friendship. But doubts have always remained about the doctor's therapies. He applied allopathy as well as homeopathy, two forms of treatment that in essence conflict with each other. Though he predicted that Vincent would never suffer from depressions again, he obviously couldn't foresee his suicide. Anyone visiting Auvers-sur-Oise will climb these old stone steps. To end up at the church of Auvers, made famous by Van Gogh's painting. Like everywhere in Auvers, panels along the roadside indicate the spots where Vincent once put down his easel. A bit below the church runs the old main street that has been carefully preserved in its original state. All of it is a protected monument. To this day, young artists, art academy students and devotees arrive daily to do the same thing Vincent once used to do here. In the small Van Gogh park in Auvers stands, just like in his birthplace Zundert, a statue of Vincent made by the Russian-French sculptor Zadkin. The special bond that has always existed between Zundert, the place of his birth, and Auvers, the place where he died, is documented by this plaque. Village, Street and Steps in Auvers with Two Figures is the title of this well-known painting. The steps are no longer the original ones, but they're still there. These images also show that Auvers-sur-Oise pays a lot of attention to keeping the village in its original state. Would it be a coincidence that the Absinthe Museum is located here? After all, Vincent was extremely fond of this drink, which was forbidden for a long time because it contained a toxic substance. The artfully landscaped part of the Château d'Auvers, also called the Château de Léry, after the family that used to own it. It was first built in the 17th century, but has been fully restored and is now an historical monument. Especially worth seeing is an artificial cave in the park with spectacular glass and shell decorations. The chateau is now under the care of the authorities of the Val d'Oise. This is one of the paintings Vincent made in the garden of the Maison de d'Aubigny. The house used to belong to the painter Charles-François d'Aubigny, another name that is indelibly connected to Auvergne. He set up a studio here and painted all the murals inside. D'Aubigny lived and worked here before Vincent came to Auvergne, so they never met. But d'Aubigny's studio has always remained a meeting place for the many artists in Auvers-sur-Oise and surroundings. The many houses and farms in Auvergne were favorite subjects for Vincent. As already mentioned, in his 70 days in Auvergne, he paints at least one canvas a day. Vincent often follows this path, which gradually ascends to the higher situated yellow wheat fields that he loves so much. Here he paints his famous wheat field with crows, as if he was suggesting that he could see his end approaching, consciously or not, intentionally or not. He paints the mairie, the Hôtel de Ville, amidst the festive atmosphere on the French national holiday of July 14, 1890. The annual celebration of the storming of the Bastille. But that same night, he apparently resolved to kill himself. An earlier visit to his brother Theo in Paris had made him realize that he is a burden to everyone. He was seized by a fatal form of despondency. And then it happens. On this spot behind the Chateau d'Auvergne, on July 27, 1890, he fatally injures himself with a firearm. He doesn't die right away. With a final exertion of strength, he stumbles back to his room at the Auberge Ravoux and lies down on his bed moaning. A fellow boarder who stays in the attic room next to his raises the alarm. Monsieur Ravoux sends for Dr. Gachet, who in turn tries to reach Theo in Paris. Theo doesn't come until the next day, but Vincent is still alive. The bullet cannot be removed, and smoking his pipe, Vincent calmly awaits his final moment. Behind this attic window, after 2 days, Vincent breathes his last. He is 37 years old. He leaves behind more than 1,900 paintings and drawings. During his lifetime, he hardly sold anything. Now he's considered a genius, and his paintings are worth millions. Immediately the next day, Vincent van Gogh is buried. An official funeral service at the church is not permitted because it was suicide. So instead, there is a brief gathering at the Auberge Ravoux. Curiously enough, his brother Theo dies 6 months later, at the age of 33 in a psychiatric clinic in Utrecht. Some 24 years later, Theo would be reburied here in Auvergne. That is where they lie now, brothers side by side.